welcome back to another edition. Glad to have you with me today. Thought I would talk about something that I've written about recently in my online column, which if you don't get the column, you can go to financialawakenings.com, sign up and get it every week. And this was on quite a painful money experience that I had. And I'll talk a little bit about the experience and not to just regurgitate the column. Go into some of the emotional underpinnings that were going on within me, both that had positive results and negative results. So first, the experience. I've written about travel insurance. I've talked about travel insurance. I don't know if I've done a podcast on travel insurance, but I've used travel insurance for a long, long time. And it's come in quite handy, like when my kids got chicken pox the night before we were supposed to go on a cruise. And there's other instances. Typically, I haven't needed it in just like a big way where I got sick or had to be evacuated back to the United States. But it's really, really important to have, I think, especially the older that you get. So recently, in June of 2024, my wife and I had booked an expedition cruise, expedition being the operative word here, for our 30th wedding anniversary. And there was a mechanical cancellation of a Delta flight that we were on that delayed us by 25 hours. That resulted in us missing the sailing by 15 minutes. And yes, we called Seabourn 4 times and they would not hold the ship. And because it's an expedition cruise and it was going to the Arctic, there are not any cities along the way that have airports where you can catch up with the ship. So there wasn't that opportunity. So, of course, I had travel insurance, and I was relatively positive, assured that the cancellation of the flight would be covered by my travel insurance, because this is the reason why you get travel insurance, is to cover losing non-refundable deposits. In addition, I was really smart. I purchased additional insurance called travel interruption for any reason. And that was coverage for 75% of the trip cost if I canceled for any reason. I've been getting that insurance, especially with 4 parents, most of who have been in failing health. When I purchased this, we had 3 parents. And most unfortunately, my mother did pass away while we were on this trip. Had she had her stroke or gotten sick prior to the trip, I could have canceled and received 75% of the cost. But those were all my assumptions. Unfortunately, I had not read the 48 pages of fine print. And had I done so, it would have revealed that my assumptions were wrong. And what turned out was a pretty expensive lesson. So the insurance company wanted proof that the flight was canceled. When I asked for that, they said it was canceled for late arriving aircraft. Well, it was canceled because they couldn't get a fuel gauge to work, and kept us informed. It was about an 8-hour delay. They took all the gas off the plane, put it all back on the plane. They put us on the plane, took us off the plane, and then they started reboarding us and stopped that. But the official reason was late arriving aircraft. And this got a real indignant, self-righteous part of me kind of up, because that wasn't the reason. I made up another, story that I had to show them that it was canceled for mechanical reasons. Well, of course, this is before I read the whole policy that said, oh, if it's a mechanical reason, it requires a 48-hour interruption. Well, we were only only interrupted for 25 hours. Had it been for weather, it was a 12-hour interruption and everything would have been covered. So this just kind of spiraled down. I let the airline know I didn't appreciate their dishonesty. I just had a lot of PTSD in the past. I remember when I was traveling with my young son, forgetting, let's see, he must have been maybe only less than 6 months old, and he cried incessantly, and we had him in Denver trying to determine what was wrong with him. And coming back home, we boarded a plane and they said, sorry, this flight's been canceled because the crew hasn't had enough sleep. They unboarded us. We sat by for 9 flights trying to get on standby. This is from Denver to Rapid City. Obviously, we could have rented a car and driven it, but we didn't know it at the time. And when I got the official reason for the cancellation, because I was applying for insurance, it was canceled for weather. Clearly not true. And I've made up a story that it's somehow easier to say it's canceled for weather. There's maybe less ramifications with an airline than if it's canceled for crew, late crew arrival, or mechanical. But those are stories that I made up. So I had that going on, and it just kind of added to this spiral that I was in over this. And I probably should say that the amount that we're talking about is not insignificant. I guess I never named it. I didn't say the name in my piece, but I really splurged for this 30th wedding anniversary. And I think, all things considered, the flight, the hotels, the fare for the 2-week expedition came to, I think it's close to $19,000. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of money. That's really painful. And I was just pretty beside myself when the airlines was not being truthful. Then when I finally, back and forth, I filed my claim and they denied it, and I got into it and then clearly saw, oh, it's in the fine print. Now the agent that I bought this from, insuremytrips.com, that I've recommended for decades, I could get into a lot of detail, but it wasn't forthcoming on the policy like other coverages are. When you look for these coverages, it will say baggage coverage, over 5 hours, maximum of 2,500 coverage, or something of that sort. When it comes to interruption and cancellation, it says nothing. And you've got to know that there's a hyperlink on the amount of coverage that you have to click on to be taken to the fine print. And that's what I didn't realize. So it was there. It just was not done in a fashion that called attention to it. So it was pretty painful. And I did receive a little bit back from the ship who was least culpable in this, and they gave me some vouchers for a portion of it. And I did receive the smattering from the company, but I was still out a significant amount of money. So, does that experience change my recommendation to purchase trip insurance? No, it doesn't. I've taken trips since. I have trips coming up, and I will continue to purchase trip insurance. So, fortunately, there's a part of me that, what I want to say, that can get really hurt, be really angry, and just kind of like want to take its marbles and go home and not play anymore, and make a broad brush that travel insurance is terrible and that every company is bad and out to rip you off, and I'm just never going to do that again. And that would be classic in IFS terms, an exile that's really hurt. Lots of messages can be causing that pain. And one is a sense of failure or shame. I think shame is the better word. that I did not read the fine print. Guilt would be, and some of it could be guilt. I think we've talked about this, that guilt is a mistake. Definitely guilt. I made a mistake. I didn't read the 48 pages of fine print. And of course, we all know to do that, right? I know to do that. Do I click on things on the internet like here's our privacy agreement and not read it? All the time. And so I just made up a story that I knew what these coverages meant, and I didn't. And what I have found, I have done a lot of research since then, and I have found huge differences in policies. There are some companies that any cancellation, 0-hour requirement. If it's canceled and you're late, well, you're not even late. It's just canceled, they'll pay. Some have a 3-hour. If you're delayed more than 3 hours, they'll pay anything that you would lose. Some are 6 hours, some are 12 hours. Unfortunately, the one I was with, which was international travel insured, was 48 hours. So I have come up with a list of companies now that offer a pretty good terms on cancellation. And of course, then there's a number of them that were just as bad as the company I was with. And maybe I'll give you those before I'm done here. So it definitely has changed who I'm going to use. And I'm going to definitely know now how to check out what those cancellation fees are, or requirements. Because just with that knowledge would have saved me $19,000. You know, that's that's a college tuition. Well, at least a year of it, right? So yes, I still recommend having travel insurance, and the biggest reason is for medical and evacuation coverage. And this is not covered by U.S. health insurance policies. So that is the number one reason for having health insurance. And I have used that insurance a lot on various trips, more recently in London when I got pneumonia, when I got COVID 6 months later in Serbia and Hungary and Vienna. I was traveling, so I was getting medical attention in all of those places. So that's a major reason for insurance. I could make up a story that they won't pay, you know. Well, I know that they do pay. And I know, at least I had the emotional maturity to know that not all insurance companies are the same. I certainly know that now when it comes to trip interruption and trip cancellation. In fact, the trip interruption on this policy that I bought, specifically in addition to be sure I was covered, didn't start till 72 hours after you began your travel. Now think about that, especially with a cruise. If anything's going to go wrong, it's probably going to go wrong within the first 72 hours of travel. And all that's excluded. If your trip is interrupted, so you could, if your trip is interrupted within that period of time, you have additional expenses to make the ship or something like that, they're not going to be covered. Now, not every policy is like that, but the one I chose was. So what I'm recommending is when you get travel insurance that you make sure that there's a delay of 6 hours or less for both cancellation and trip interruption. Usually 6 hours isn't going to completely tank an entire trip. And also, if you purchase travel interruption for any reason, be sure you understand the definition of any, because clearly I thought any was any, and any is not any in a legal contract. You have to read the definition of any, and in this case it was any interruption after 72 hours. So what happened with this is that my wife and I rebooked on a trip a few weeks later. It was the same itinerary on the same ship, and we did go and have our 30th anniversary trip, just not over our anniversary. And it was on that particular trip that my mother passed away. So the bottom line is, had I understood more about the cancellation coverages and trip interruption coverages and taken the time, I could have saved us a huge financial hit. And the thing that really got in my way was a bias, which we've talked about before, which was over bias. I mean, I've written on this stuff. I've talked about this stuff. I tell clients about this stuff. And here I made a mistake as bad as anybody I've known. I mean, I really don't know anybody that's lost this amount of money and had insurance. So I learned several things. I learned I probably won't use insuremytrip.com anymore. I mean, I know what to look at, but I have had extensive talks with the company, and they have done absolutely nothing to acknowledge that their site wasn't really forthcoming with the information. And that leaves me feeling really unseen and unheard. And that's a pretty good trigger for me. When I have this type of experience with a company, it goes a long way if someone says, I get it. For example, I bought an espresso maker from DeLonghi. I had purchased several espresso machines from DeLonghi in the past. And purchased one, and in 4 months, it's a lemon. And I send it back. They send me another one. Well, that one's a lemon in a different way. I send it back, and they send me another one, and that one's a lemon. And there's probably 3, 4, 5 months of having to send in videos, having to call, having them lose videos, having to email, having to explain the same thing every time I email to another agent. And this went on for 2 years. And I finally just gave up. I filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and with the, I'm thinking the Consumer Division of the Attorney General. And somebody did reach out to me and said, I have gone through your file for the last 2 years, and I have followed everything you've been through. And I see now that we had 2 different accounts for you, and this accounted for all sorts of confusion. And I am so sorry for what you've gone through. If I were you, I'd be livid. And I probably would have done more than just file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and the Consumer Division of the Attorney General. And she said, we're going to send you an upgrade and a new machine. I am so sorry. Well, after not being seen for 2 years in complete frustration, and why did I hang on for 2 years? I have to explore that one. I finally felt seen. I finally felt heard. It probably wasn't enough that I would ever buy a DeLonghi machine again, because their service for 2 years was just terrible, as well as was the performance of the machine. But that's what parts of me respond well to. And admittedly, I have triggers when I'm not seen and I'm not heard. And so certainly my experience with Insure My Trip activated all of those feelings and stories. And there's another online purchase, a place called squaremouth.com, that does a little bit more to come forward with some of these details. So I'll be using them as far as brokers to shop for travel insurance. And I said I would maybe tell you the companies to be aware of and to use. So in doing this research, and this has taken hours of time. Again, had I done what a part of me knew to do and explore and not had the overconfidence bias that I really knew the coverage I was getting and what I was doing, it would have saved me a ton of money and a ton of time. But hopefully this is for your benefit. I once had a client that said something to the fact that I figured this out, Rick. Your job is to make every financial mistake there is so that we don't have to. So this falls into that. So some of the ones that I would not use are Crum & Foster's Travel Insured International, who I used. company called 10 Leg, Nationwide, Trawick, that's Trawick, and Seven Corners. All of these have waiting periods of over 48 hours for mechanical delays and 12 to 48 hours for weather delays. And you would be really good to avoid them. The companies that I will use going forward is one called, AEGIS. I don't know how you say that. Berkshire Hathaway, Generali, TravelX, and World Trip. Now, even with these companies, reading the fine print is really required. For example, Generali has no minimum delay required for trip interruption, but they won't pay if the delay happens on your outbound flight. What? Okay, so I don't want to count on them for trip interruption. If you're catching a cruise, what's the point? And like I said, I'll also be using Squaremouth, but all these to shop, all these companies have 0 to 6 hours of delay for interruption and weather, and I would generally recommend them. So I think it's important to take a look at the trip insurance. Certainly, when I reflect on this, I had a lot of frustration, anger, hurt over missing the trip of a lifetime and the cost that this has. It really left me feeling so powerless, depending on all of these players. And of course, there's the finger pointing, the airlines pointing at the travel company pointing at the airlines or the weather or the contract or something else. I've talked about the righteous indignation that came up within me, which is really quite typical in a Enneagram Type 1. There was a common confirmation bias playing within me where I believed that the mechanical delay should be covered. And once my claim was denied, I interpreted the airline's ambiguity as deliberate dishonesty. So that was playing. I've talked about overconfidence bias. Just a lot of regret came up, and shame. The shame is more, I'm a bad person, for not having read or for all the fine print. So guilt and shame played a part in this. Some of the things that were good is I did have some self-compassion and some emotional maturity and not just trashing travel insurance and saying all these companies are the same. So I was pleased to see that part of me that still could get through all of the hurt and pain of this and say, yeah, that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm happy that I did purchase insurance. I got a little bit back, maybe a total of $3,000 in miscellaneous stuff here and there. So my intention was certainly in the right direction. But the bottom line is I will not make the assumptions that I made in the past. And I will learn from this. I have already learned from this. And will shop insurance with companies that provide the coverage that I need. Now make sure that I suss that out, so to speak. So, well, thanks for listening, and I hope that this has been helpful to you and just some learning in my experience with this, and that hopefully you can not make the same mistakes I did. So emotions are involved even in buying travel insurance. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions, reach out to me, rick@rickkaler.com. And I really appreciate all the comments that I do get. Take care. Talk with you next week.